Hello, welcome to the Ornstein Chapman Podcast on The Athletic. As usual, we will bring you exclusive and original stories and interviews offering agenda-setting insight from inside the game from David and writers from across The Athletic. Coming up today, we're basically going to look at football's response to the coronavirus and the mechanics behind the pivotal meetings that are coming up at both UEFA and the Premier League this week. We'll also, though, talk about details of a possible new deal for Paul Pogba and also why police were called to the boardroom at Charlton Athletic. And just by listening to us, you can get a 40% discount on subscription by going to theathletic.com/Ornstein and Chapman. David, obviously a difficult time for everyone at the moment. So many people, and probably a lot of people listening to us, rely on sport for their livelihood as well. You've also been talking to lots of people within the football community over the last few days. What is there? I mean, is there a general reaction? Is there a general feeling, or is it very much like society and very differing opinions?
Yeah, so the general feeling, Mark, is one that we probably all share. Nobody that I've spoken to within football has any idea what's happening. There's complete confusion because it's uncharted territory. It's unprecedented circumstances. Across the board, just a lack of clarity. So I've been speaking to some players who there's a bit of novelty around it, there's a bit of fear, there's a bit of unknown. Their priority at this sort of moment in time, in such a immediate and raw situation, is their own health, their family's health, the health of those around them, but also their fitness situation. Most of them, from those that I've spoken to, are planning for the resumption on the 3rd, the 4th of April. It doesn't matter that it's not realistic. It just gives them a target to try and keep some level of fitness for. There are some who haven't got fitness equipment at their own homes. Some of them rent. Some of them are in apartments that don't have, weights or exercise bikes or whatever. And some of them are in self-isolation, so they can't leave those apartments to go down to, say, a communal gym, which was the case with one player I spoke to. Others are more beneficial. They have their own equipment at home, even their own swimming pools, their own personal trainers. And it's really interesting that one of England's leading clubs has been sending a fleet of vehicles round, dropping off equipment at their players' houses, exercise bikes, whatever they need really, weights. And then certain players who are in rehab have been having FaceTime sessions on the phone with their physios who are running them through, each set, each rep, and that sort of thing, so they're keeping in a reasonable shape. There is concern among players that those who are training as normal, like Tottenham, for example, Manchester United, and a few others, if the resumption does come soon, then those players are going to be in top condition, perhaps even in better situations with the likes of Harry Kane and Son Heung-min possibly coming back to fitness, whereas players at clubs like Chelsea and Arsenal, in self-isolation for 14 days, they're potentially in a far less advantageous physical state. Then you go on to the executives. They're all pinning their hopes on Tuesday's UEFA meeting. They hope that that will bring significant clarity over the club game and over Euro 2020. Agents, it's all over the place. Negotiations have pretty much stopped over transfers. They were reaching critical points in many of those potential deals. So they're going to have to pick those up at a later point. But will the terms have changed? Will they have a stronger hand? Will the situation be weaker for the player? So much unknown. A lot of concern over players whose contracts expire on the 30th of June and what's going to happen with them. And if suddenly a club comes and says, we want to give you a short-term extension, many of those agents are going to turn around and say, well, you didn't want us previously. You didn't want a new deal with us running up to the 30th of June, and now suddenly you do. And they'll try and get longer or more money or, all sorts of things around that. So really there's pandemonium, but this is all relative. It's not nearly as serious as people's lives, and that should be the overwhelming priority in this.
It's going to be very important over the course of this podcast and any other broadcasts and podcasts over the coming week and longer than that, of course, to try and deal with facts rather than speculation. We can bring Matt Slater, the Athletics Football News and Investigations reporter, into the conversation. Matt, we know that UEFA will have a meeting on Tuesday to discuss European football's response to COVID-19. first of all I keep hearing is UEFA are going to have a meeting. What I don't know is what that means in terms of who is there.
This is so large, so complicated. We're learning so much, I think, now about how joined up the football industry is, that there are endless knock-on effects and implications. So the invite went out last week. It is to UEFA's 55 member associations, so the FAs from the 55 European countries that are members of UEFA. What they refer to as their stakeholders, so the European Club Association, which is the umbrella group that represents the wealthier clubs. There's about 250 of them across Europe. European Leagues, which again is an umbrella organisation, which I think represents best part of 40 leagues, domestic leagues across Europe. FIFPro, the Global Players Union, so that people like the PFA, the Scottish PFA, can all feed into FIFPro. And then I think UEFA itself, EXCO, their board. So I think there's going to be 3 meetings, and I think, as you've already framed it in your question, there's one thing on the agenda. It's the coronavirus, and that means trying to find a solution that works for all the domestic leagues, all the clubs, but equally UEFA as well. UEFA has 2 club competitions to finish, and then of course the huge elephant in the room is Euro 2020 itself. And I think if there is going to be an outcome from the meeting, I think it is just the confirmation that everyone has pretty much known for the last week that Euro 2020 has to move from this summer.
Just before I come on to that, and as I say to you whenever we have you on, if I ask you a question that you can't answer, just say I don't know, because things just when you then sort of give me an indication for who's there at that meeting, then I start to think, okay, right, who would represent the interests of, say, Aston Villa in this meeting? Who would, and I've picked a club at random from the Premier League, but one that isn't part of, I'm assuming, the big European powerhouses, year in, year out. Who would speak for Swindon Town at this meeting? Would that be the FA on both counts? Well,
that's a really good question. So I think Aston Villa, I'd have to check. I'm fairly sure they're a member of the European Club Association. A club like Aston Villa would have a voice, a small voice, let's be honest, through the European Club Association. Sure. Would have a bigger voice through our FA. But of course, I think the key thing about the clubs like Villa, Premier League clubs, is they are at the moment working together and would have representation through the European leagues as well. Now, a club like Swindon, you're right, I think would be hoping that the European leagues, again, which the EFL is a key member of the European leagues, would have representation there. Its voice would be heard, and equally the FA. So there are, I think there are enough people under that tent to speak for most constituencies. But the problem is everything is up for debate. Everything's up for question. Everybody has their own little agenda. Everybody has their own problem. And it's going to become very, very hard in one meeting or even a week of meetings to hear all of those, to weigh all of those properly.
Matt, one of the sad inevitabilities about this that I've found is the contrasting interests and egos and priorities. I do understand them, but it's just not pleasant to see them being voiced so publicly. And even behind the scenes, I've spoken to people at clubs where they just don't even want to talk about the football. They are being so responsible and cautious. And others where they are desperate to get on and train and play matches. They've had no cases or symptoms. They're in good positions in the league table and they want to get things sorted. It's not fair for me to name names. When this UEFA meeting goes ahead, who will ultimately make the call on what happens?
Well, that's a really good question. And from a UEFA point of view, it would be their EXCO. 18 members, with David Gills there, the former Man United treasurer. Some other familiar names, guys like Ivan Gazidis, ex-Arsenal. And it's led by Alexander Shefferin, the president. There is a broad church that represents small nations within Europe, medium nations, large nations. There are some big clubs represented there, guys like Andrea Agnelli from Juve. ECA have 2 members, and PSG's boss, Nasser Al-Khalifi. And then there are there are people that represent the domestic leagues, and I would include the EFL, the Scottish League. People are very wary about going on the record. They don't want to seem to be the sort of obnoxious, self-interested people right now. We have, of course, over the weekend seen someone put their head above the parapet, who we may well discuss. I don't know if we'll discuss her right now. Karen Brady did sort of voice the let's declare the season null and void, because that is one of the solutions. That is one of the ways out of this legally. It also happens to be a way that suits her football club really, really nicely. And this is the problem. This is where we're at. So many conflicting agendas.
Will their decision be final, the UEFA Exco, or are we going to open a can of worms and see legal challenges and some very disgruntled clubs, or will that decision be respected?
Good question. And I think this is why UEFA, who are a collegiate bunch, when things are going well, they are. And Ceferin, whilst he's not new, he's still in his first term. He's still, I wouldn't say, he's not like a Sepp Blatter type figure that has loads of political capital and bestrides his organisation. I suspect there'll be a lot more talking. UEFA are not going to send diktats out about this is the way it's going to be. We've sorted it all out, guys. Don't you worry. England, here's your solution. Sweden, here's yours. Russia, you do this. No, there's going to be a lot more talking. There's going to be, and FIFA haven't really got involved yet. Any solution that involves our domestic leagues and involves what happens with the Euros, moving, going to the winter, going to next summer, has massive knock-on effects, not only for FIFA, but for other confederations. There's weeks more of this, weeks and months more of this. What we're going to get on Tuesday, I think, is an admission, guys, Euro 2020 is moving. Here are some of the things we can do around finishing our club competitions. Here are some of the things that you should be doing in domestic leagues. Here's some of the flexibility that we have right now in our calendar. But this is all contingent on the next 6, 10, 14 weeks going in a way that we can kind of imagine and predict and model.
They will have this meeting and then come to a decision, or is there a voting process here? Because when it comes to the Premier League meeting on Thursday, if they were going to make decisions, then there are votes on that. Just as far as UEFA is concerned, before we come on to the Premier League, UEFA, they as an exec will hear all the different points of view, ideas, requests, and then if they were going to decide anything, I'm not going to ask you what they might decide, then they as an exec can take that decision.
I think, but this goes back to my last answer, that they are going to be really careful about how far they go and what they decide on. And I think if there is a decision, it will be Euro 2020 moves.
Yeah, but so what I'm saying is they could say, right, we will move your... Yeah, what I'm saying is they don't have to have the conference, the meetings, everybody who's participating in the video call take a vote on Euro 2020.
No, because that is the blockage. That's the obvious blockage right now. If we're gonna do anything other than declare the season null and void, with all of the things, the bad things that flow from that, the rows, the cries of unfairness, the decades of resentment that will flow from that, the only way to give us any options going forward is Euro 2020 move, and that is within UEFA's gift, and they have been talking about that, I know for a fact, for 10 days at least.
If we move on to the Premier League, anything that they decide, and again, everybody knows the different options, and I think as you alluded to, this isn't going to be unravelled this week. This is going to take 6, 10, 14 weeks, whatever it may be. But anything that is decided within a Premier League meeting has to be voted on and ratified by a 2/3 majority, yes?
Yeah. Correct.
And this is where self-interest comes into play.
I'm not really expecting much this week. I'm not. I think we've got a lot more of this. This is the new football.
Actually, as we've kind of said, there's no need for them to rush at the moment. Bar the fact that there will be lots of people, as we've mentioned at the start, livelihoods on the line here. Huge numbers of casual staff who work match days at not only Premier League clubs but EFL clubs, and I know Brighton are one if maybe not the only one, as far as I can tell at the moment, who are saying they're going to continue to pay their matchday staff through all of this. Those people will want clarity actually at some point, I'm guessing, but they've already given themselves till the beginning of April to think about things and talk things through. And really, given the health situation of the nation, there is no need to rush.
Absolutely. And that is, I think, the only sensible thing to do right now. That sort of 2 and a bit week window they gave themselves really was breathing space. They got ahead of the government advice there, I think, for obvious reasons, Mikel Arteta and etc. They felt they had to do something, and I think it was the right call. I think we can all agree on that. I also strongly believe that we're talking about May, really, for any kind of resumption. The key one for me is, do they feel they can coherently finish this season with all the potential impacts on competitive integrity?
The Athletic writers at the moment are sharing their favourite stories and are making them available for non-subscribers to read. So if you are a non-subscriber who regularly listens to this pod, all the Athletic writers have got these stories up there for you. What's yours, Matt?
My one is about being an away fan in Europe, and it involves aggressive dogs, police in riot gear, water cannons, barbed wire, cups of urine, the good old days.
Real football.
Yeah.
And just to clarify, that's from being an away fan, not being a journalist.
That's not daily. That's not That's me travelling around pre-pandemic Europe.
Matt, thank you. We will listen. We're going to talk next week. Mate. We might talk later this week, probably, but for now, thank you. Well, Paul Pogba is expected to return to training with Manchester United this week. There's also talk of him now signing a new contract. Let's talk to the Athletics United writer, Laurie Whitwell. Where's this come from?
Yeah, it's a change of sort of mood, I suppose, since the last time we heard.
And then some. That's an understatement if ever there was one.
I mean, it's always been this way with Mino Raiola. Whenever he's spoken, he has dangled this carrot of a new contract. I mean, even last summer there was talk of initial approach from United, sort of looking at whether they could do something. That was kind of parked when I think the response was very much no thank you. But then even when he sort of went on his latest round of interviews in February after sort of Solskjaer had a bit of a pop at him following the Haaland stuff, Raiola did mention in one of those interviews that could even sign a new contract. I mean, United sort of judged all that publicity at the time. They took it very lightly. They know that Mino Raiola can say different things to different people, and who knows exactly what's going on. So, but I don't know. Just speaking to certain people around the squad, they obviously see what's happening with the run, with the success that is putting together at the moment, and they feel like maybe Pogba is more open to staying. Listen, obviously there's various different factors in that. Are there suitors out there that would pay the money? Given everything that's going on with coronavirus, when will he be back playing, and would a club really put across that kind of finance for somebody who hasn't played since December, and then also, does he now see that the success of Bruno Fernandes and think, actually, I'll have a bit of that? I quite like the idea of sort of riffing off him in midfield. Certainly people have looked at the potential midfield of Bruno, Pogba, and perhaps McTominay or Fred as quite a mouthwatering one. So it just seems like a little bit of a change. I mean, obviously he's been back in training at Carrington, so he's actually been a presence more than he had been when he was out injured and getting rehab, in the USA or wherever. So I think that's sort of all contributing to this sort of idea that perhaps it's not as certain as it seemed that he was going to be off in the summer.
Laurie, interesting that while United were doing quite poorly by their expectations, all the noise was Pogba leaving. Mm-hmm. As soon as they start to pick up and look like they're going in a pretty positive direction, and there's less talk around him, suddenly it's like, could he stay? Could he sign a new contract? And he seems to have been pretty canny in all of this, because we've not heard a single word from him, just people around him and the club.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, clearly there's that is a very so sensible thing to think, really, when you're looking at Pogba. I suppose he would always say, I only ever wanted to win trophies at United. That's basically been Raiola's strand to things, that, he thought he was coming back to United to win the Premier League, compete for the Champions League. And if he actually sees that is the case now with United, that they could potentially, one day in the future do those things, then he's probably more willing. The cynic might say, well, actually, you've been out for so long, you haven't played, the club has actually moved on, and now they are in a strong position because he isn't the be-all and end-all. When he came back in December after his 3-month spell out, it was basically essential that he was in the squad for Watford after 2 training sessions, and then he was on the pitch in the second half because United were playing poorly and needed sort of a bit of invigoration, and he did provide that in that sort of cameo that he had. Whereas now, Solskjaer has managed to shape the squad in a way that he is more, that he likes in a better way, really. And the players are playing more for him in a collective. So you've got Harry Maguire's probably more important now. Bruno, is more important. You've got Anthony Martial playing well. So you've got different figures there that actually could lead United on. And Pogba isn't necessarily as essential as he once was.
Is there any way United will have put this out there that he might sign a new contract to flush out interest?
Oh, I don't know, actually. I don't think so. I mean, the original story was from Sammy Motbell in the Daily Mail, and, as far as I'm aware, his contacts are perhaps elsewhere. I think he's just a really good reporter that gets good stories often, so he'll speak to people, and that'll be, well sourced. From my point of view, I haven't really checked this with United to any great degree, other than just to sort of say, are United back in training on Tuesday, and is Pogba around the setup? So I'm pretty sure that's all correct. So, they're definitely back in training on Tuesday. And it's up to Solskjaer, really, I think, whether he integrates him right from the get-go, or whether he sort of takes a little bit more time. But he's basically back in full training, really. So yeah, but I don't think it's a tactic by United to particularly flush out interest. I don't think they're that fussed about it at the moment. I think they're kind of happy to go along with what's happening on the pitch, and they'll come to it sort of as and when. I mean, obviously it's up to Raiola, really, to bring a club to the table with a bid that they deem acceptable.
Could we take a rare positive slant to it and say that United, with a fit and informed Pogba added to their other sort of what would appear pretty impressive resources of late anyway, could be a decent proposition?
It'd be brilliant, wouldn't it, really? A focused Paul Pogba. I mean, you look at the stats from last season and even this season, he's still up there for chances created, I think, like 14 or 15. And, that's probably 4th or 5th in the list of all players for United, which is crazy considering he's only played 8 games, in total. So clearly, if he's actually on it and if he's fully focused and committed, it would be an awesome prospect when you look at what he could join. I suppose it's just that massive if he really is switched on, if he really is committed, and obviously he's shown at various points that can flip from absolute commitment to sort of a kind of laissez-faire attitude. So I mean, obviously we'll have to wait and see. He's a bit rusty in training apparently, to begin with, but he's been doing a lot of work, been putting quite hard graft in. Michael Carrick's been doing some ball work with him, specific tactical stuff, I think. So he's definitely sort of focused in more recent weeks, so I guess we'll have to just wait and see how he comes back.
Obviously, talking with Matt Slater earlier about various possibilities going forward, and this could be a long way off when games might even be played behind closed doors. You were at United's Europa League game last week that did take place behind closed doors. What was that like? Yeah,
really weird. I mean, you're sort of thinking it's the last 16 Europa League tie. It's the biggest game in Lask Linz's history, and there was absolutely nobody there. There was about 150 family and friends from Lask in front of us in the press box who were giving it a sort of decent go at giving a bit of atmosphere to it, and there was some United fans that had sort of stood up by the sort of hill that was overlooking the stadium that you couldn't really see into the ground too much, but I think they had a slither of a view, and they were giving it a few songs. The team chef actually actually started up a United We Love You chant, which Solskjaer mentioned in his post-match press conference that he was happy with, and there was a fan channel that sung a couple of songs as well. But yeah, it was a kind of weird sort of situation. I mean, I sort of took it as a bit of an opportunity to try and earwig on what the players were saying to each other.
Are they vocal?
Well, weirdly, I wondered if I think they've been told sort of just watch the language a little bit, because clearly they could get picked up. Because when Odinogalo scored, for example, there wasn't really that much cheering. It was odd, and each goal there was sort of quite a. And I don't know if it was the man of the game that they expected to sort of win and go through, but there wasn't the kind of absolute outrageous joy that obviously we saw with Scott McTominay, and I wonder what that would have sounded like without the fans, going crazy in the stands. But I don't know, it all felt a bit muted. I mean, you certainly heard some aspects that came out. Maguire is very vocal. He was constantly sort of talking to people, getting them into position, appealing for stuff. Very much giving Luke Shaw instruction on the left of him, sort of to go forward, to drive. In that Sheffield accent that he's got, you could clearly detect that, and Solskjaer found it quite useful. It's in a managerial sense to sort of. There was one bit where he sort of nodded to Mason Greenwood to sort of go and make a run, and I guess perhaps in. I think he sort of shouted to him a little bit before that, and I guess if a crowd had been in that position, then he wouldn't have been able to do that as easily. So interesting sort of experiment, not one that I'd like to repeat, but I do fear from speaking to people that that might be the only way that they manage to finish this season and avoid the financial oblivion that is not fulfilling fixtures in terms of broadcast contracts.
You wrote on, as part of David's column today, just moving away from Manchester United, that England's friendlies being cancelled, maybe the postponement of the Euros as well, would affect some players who could have been in this squad and maybe we haven't seen before, one in particular.
Yeah, Ben Mee was a name that got brought to my attention, and I think he's been sort of mentioned before a little bit with England, but I guess never really too seriously. And listen, maybe Southgate was just sort of doing a bit of due diligence and kind of wondering whether he would be good enough. But yeah, it certainly made some discreet inquiries about him. He's obviously been at Turf Moor quite frequently, given he's got Nick Pope there, and Dwight McNeil I think has also been somebody that's caught his eye. But yeah, Ben Mee was an interesting one. I mean, he's played every single minute for Burnley. He's up there for aerial clearances, and he's the captain of Burnley, so obviously he brings a leadership to him. He's 30 now though, so you sort of wonder, is a player like that, would he have been a sort of a bit of a wild card in the March friendlies just to see what he was like? Because you look at the defensive options that he's got, and Harry Maguire's really the only guaranteed one. Obviously Joe Gomez, you'd probably say, would be alongside him, but what's happened to John Stones is sort of made his place less certain, and also Fikayo Tomori, who was in the squad in November, he's sort of a little bit out of the picture at Chelsea. So clearly it was an area of his team that he thought he might have a look at some new faces, and Ben Mee was I guess in the contention. But yeah, I guess we'll never know until international start again. I know obviously people are talking about Euros being postponed, and that does seem the likeliest course of of action, but which would be quite sad, I think, for people like that in that position.
And let's end, as we did with Matt, with your favourite piece that The Athletic have unlocked. What's yours about?
Oh, you're going to hate this. This is totally ripe for some cynicism, chappers. It's Manchester United going 4,000 games in a row with a youth team player in the squad, which was an incredible stat. So, yeah, obviously I spoke to Ryan Giggs, Nicky Butt, Clayton Blackmore, like a load of people that basically were talking me through their debuts and what it meant to come through the academy. Some interesting little stories. Josh Harrop, for one, had one match for United on his debut, scored, but passed. I
tell you what, he looked good in that game. Did Josh Harrop? That was against Crystal Palace at Old Trafford. Yeah. He looked good in that game, and before you knew it, he was on his way to Preston.
Well, that was so. In the piece, I talk about how he already was thinking he was on his way out before that game, and then that game was a perfect sort of platform for him, and he had a sort of 2-week period where he was sort of debating whether to sign a new contract from United or whether to, leave and go on a free to Preston or other clubs that he had an opportunity to. And in the end, he sort of felt that the contract that wasn't really a sign from United that they wanted him. So he left. But yeah, he leaves having 1 game, 1 goal. A great little record, 100% record really. So yeah, but with this little tales like that throughout the piece, so I really enjoyed writing it and speaking to people.
Good. I'll read. I'm not going to be cynical about that. I like that. That's a great stat, something to be proud of. If you'd done if you'd done Ed Woodward, my top 10 United games, I might have, cancelled
Give me an idea for a piece. Give me an idea for a piece whilst we're having this suspension.
Now, one story that may have slipped under the radar for a lot of you over the last week involves Charlton Athletic. Following a major disagreement between Chairman Matt Southall and majority shareholder Tanu Nima, Jack Pitt-Brooke has written about this for The Athletic. I mean, if you just go back a couple of months ago, Jack, Charlton fans were full of optimism. They'd got rid of the nightmare of their previous regime, and now it looks like problems again.
Yeah, so obviously Roland Duchâtelet was in charge at Charlton for 6 years. He was hated by the fans. There were years of protests against him. And then when he decided to sell to East Street Investments over Christmas, there was a real sense at Charlton of a fresh start and that the bad days were over, really. So it's amazing to see literally only 2 and a bit months since the takeover was completed, it all unravelling like this in a week of incredible kind of open warfare, really, between the two sides of the East Street Investments team, which on the one hand is Tanu Nima, who's basically an investor from Abu Dhabi, who's brought the money for the Charlton takeover, and Matt Southall, who he recruited as his front man, who was effectively running the club as executive chairman.
So now we're told that the police were called to the Valley last week. So how has it got to this point? What has gone on in this 2 months?
Nima was angry with how Southall was running the club, namely how much money Southall was paying himself and the incredible package that Southall had put together. So Southall was on a salary of about 200 grand, which is roughly in line with the guidelines for someone running a championship club. He had a brand new white Range Rover lease, which costs about £100,000. He had a £50,000 bonus for the completion of the takeover. He was renting a luxury flat near Tower Bridge, which cost £12,500 a month to rent. Now, sources say that this was a club flat and not only for Southall, but with this huge package that Southall had for himself and also stuff that he had acquired for his coterie and advisors, Nima eventually gave up. He lost patience with how Southall was running it, and then basically went on Instagram and started hammering Southall and attacking him for how he was running the club. And then Southall responded with these angry statements on the Charlton Athletic website. And we had this surreal week of very, very public criticism, all of it done online through the Charlton website and Tanu's Instagram account. And lawyers got involved. And then eventually on Wednesday, Nima decided to try to get rid of Southall. And on Thursday, Nima's legal team showed up at the Valley with legal papers to get rid of Southall. They handed these to Charlton Athletic, I believe he's club safety officer, Mick Everett, who handed them to Southall. Southall tried to sack Everett. It all blew up, basically. And then a Charlton Athletic official had to call the police at 6:30 just to try to get an amicable resolution to this. Now, Southall left the Valley on Thursday night. He said that he intended to return to work on Friday morning. I actually went to the Valley car park to hang around the stadium on Friday morning, given that there wasn't obviously there were no other stories in football worth covering on Friday. So I stood in the Charlton car park from about 8 o'clock in the morning to about 11 o'clock in the morning, at which point it became clear that Southall was not going to return to work. His camp had been very quiet since Friday. And I think I might be wrong. I think the Southall regime is over. I mean, there was a statement on the Charlton Athletic website on Friday afternoon, which read as if Nima had taken control. So it looks, and we might be wrong, but it looks as if Nima has won this war, and Nima is now in charge of Charlton Athletic.
Jack, this sounds like an episode of Dream Team at Harchester United or something. It's absolutely extraordinary, especially for a club that not so long ago was in the Premier League and for a period doing quite well. It's probably worth explaining for people listening. This isn't maybe a case of careful what you wish for with a previous owner, because he was also so disliked and contentious, and that was how some of these fan groups sprung up in sort of protest at him. And equally, this is not like a Hicks and Gillette owner fallout at Liverpool, because these two parties were put together. There's a similar situation at Wycombe Wanderers, where the Kuigs, who have now taken over, they worked with somebody to run the club in the early days, to see their takeover through, and they've now gone their separate ways. That's not entirely unheard of when some of these people come together almost by convenience.
Yeah, completely. I think it's interesting seeing the emotions of Charlton fans over this, because they were so happy when Du Châtelet left, because Du Châtelet he'd been so unpopular with them over the course of his 6 years. He really starved the club of funds and optimism. There was no hope for the future. And so all this kind of machinery of anti-Du Châtelet protest had been wound down in the last few months. And then it came to light on, I think, Thursday of last week, that CARD, that's the Coalition Against Roland Du Châtelet, had actually got the gang back together, and they were planning a big protest at the home game that was scheduled to be played against Queen's Park Rangers on Tuesday evening. Obviously, that game is not going ahead now, and there is seemingly no need for protest. And sorry, I should be clear, that was a protest against Southall, not against Nîmes. The fans had decided that they were, whatever they might think about Nîmes, and nobody knows really what his intentions are, or if he's going to put up the money or whatever, but the fans did take against Southall after the recent revelations about spending. So yeah, it does show what incredibly, ownership is so difficult. Like, it's so hard to get good owners. And even though in the Premier League, I think we haven't seen that many very bad owners in the last, say, 5 to 10 years, it's not that long ago that there was, Venky's and everyone at Portsmouth. And clearly in the Championship, it's much easier for people with questionable intentions or abilities to take over a club.
Your point about the fans siding with the new majority shareholders, all the more extraordinary because the club was putting statements out backing Matt Southall. So it really is, as you call it, open warfare. One thing that I was quite confused by is how this new majority shareholder can come in, and then reading your excellent piece, it explains that him putting money in was never part of the plan for the first couple of months. I mean, what on earth's going on there?
Yeah, so that again is one of the massive questions that Charlton fans have got, and that was always one of Southall's complaints about Nîmes, is that Nîmes didn't put up money. So obviously Nîmes, had to buy the club in the first instance, though that wouldn't have been very expensive because he didn't buy the stadium or the training ground, which is still owned by Roland Du Châtelet. Since then, the club has mainly been running off money it's already got through transfers. Obviously, with their fantastic academy, they do make a fair bit of money through player trading. But there's not an awful lot of money left, and that was always one of the big questions asked to Southall, was how can you spend all this money when the club hasn't got that much to survive on? And even recently, Southall had to tell the players that, we probably have enough money to run without Nîmes' investments until December. Obviously, that situation, as we know, is now even more precarious because that will have been budgeting on Charlton having a certain number of home games, which are now in doubt. So yeah, there's huge questions to be asked of Nîmes. He has said, his side has said that it wasn't always the plan for him to invest a lot of money front up, but he's going to have to put some money in sometime because Charlton Athletic, without home games, won't have the capacity to survive for that long.
Well, this is completely the wrong time for instability, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, in a sense, it's just an extreme example of conversations that will be had at Championship, League One, League Two clubs around the country, which is, there's so much financial precariousness for those teams, and they all rely on getting however many thousands of people through the gates every other Saturday or Tuesday. If you take that money away from them, then how on earth are they going to cope? I mean, it's fine in the Premier League when you get so much in broadcast and commercial money that, the big Premier League clubs can actually do without match day revenue for a while. But at the lower levels of football, the ones that aren't lucky enough to have cash reserves or a generous benefactor or kind of financial stability, there are, frankly, there are much more Charltons. If you look beneath the surface, there are far more Charltons, I think, than we would want to see, and lots of clubs are going to really, really struggle.
Let's go back to a simpler time, shall we, Jack, for your favourite story that's free to read at the moment on The Athletic. It's the 94 Spurs side.
So this was a story I did at the start of the season. It was, I think, a really interesting but rather brief time in English football, really. So this is Ossie Ardiles' Spurs team. So Ossie Ardiles took over as Spurs manager in 1993. And then the summer of 1994, Alan Sugar gave him this amazing spending spree where they signed Jurgen Klinsmann, Gica Popescu and Ili Dumitrescu. And for about 3 or 4 games, they looked fantastic, like they could win what was then the Premiership. And then it obviously all went wrong, and Ardiles was sacked in October and replaced by Jerry Francis, who had a slightly different approach. And it was amazing at the time because this had literally never been done before. Like an English team had never gone out and bought 3 superstars from all over Europe, and not even from countries like Denmark or Holland or the Republic of Ireland, which have traditionally provided players for English football, and tried to play in this incredibly expansive, aggressive, attacking style, which Ardiles had learnt playing for the Argentina national team, winning the 1978 World Cup and all that. So it was a real experiment in cosmopolitanism and can foreign football and foreign players work in England? Now, obviously it didn't work, but what I wanted to explore in this piece was, one, like, why didn't it work? But also, was it the first step on the process which we're still seeing? I mean, this was only, remember, 2 years before Wenger showed up. And when Arsene Wenger took over at Arsenal, he had similar ideas of, I want to play in a sort of more foreign style of play, and I'm going to buy a handful of very good foreign players who I think can cut it over here. And of course, Wenger was lucky enough that he inherited the Arsenal defence, and he had the kind of stable basis to do that experimentation. Whereas, unfortunately, 2 years beforehand at Tottenham, Ardiles didn't have that stable foundation. And it turned out that everything he tried to build was basically it's like a house of cards. There was no basis to it, and it all collapsed.
Anything else you'd just like to point people in the direction of in your column? There's some good stuff in there. Only tease it, though.
Yeah, we broke the news about Liverpool needing to sort of reopen their search for a head of medical because Andrew Massey, who was the doctor there, has left for FIFA. That was widely reported. They had somebody lined up to replace him. It was all pretty much done and dusted, nearly over the line. And then that medic from Arsenal has changed his mind, is now staying at Arsenal. Real coup for them. But it leaves Liverpool with a bit of a sticky situation, especially at a really important time with all the coronavirus situation going on. But they do have an academy medic who has stepped up to the role on an interim basis, but they need to get that sorted. Various other bits and bobs. What should I pick out? Maybe Phil Neville walking around his local supermarket on Sunday wearing white latex gloves. But everybody's taking different precautions, and full respect to them for that. There's loads of good stuff in there this week. So, take a look.
Yes, you can subscribe to The Athletic to read in full the great articles from the likes of David and Matt and our team of writers from across The Athletic. There's obviously the free stuff up there as well that we've been talking about. There are going to be some amazing articles across The Athletic, even if there is no football being played, including at the moment James Horncastle, who has sat down to watch Edin Dzeko's best goals with Edin Dzeko, and Michael Cox has reached number 9 in his iconic shirt number series. So they're all on The Athletic. Just by listening to us, you get a 40% discount on subscription. Just go to theathletic.com/Ornstein and Chapman, theathletic.com/Ornstein and Chapman. All of our podcasts are completely free. The ad-free versions are available to subscribers. That's it. We'll be back next week.